Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Virginia Military Institute. At this time, a by-name reading of all 591 VMI alumni killed in action in each of our nation's war will be read aloud. We ask that you silence your cell phones and please maintain quiet in recognition of this solemn ceremony. VMI alumni died on the field of honor. Mexican-American War: Anthony W. Southall, Charles E. Carter, Alexander M. McCorkle, Carlton R. Munford. American Civil War: William M. Abel, Louis B. Adie, Thomas Alexander, James W. Allen, Robert C. Allen, Robert I. Anthony, John S. Armistead, James L. Ashby, John W. Ashby, Richard Ashby, Samuel F. Atwill, Thomas W. Banks, Charles M. Barton, Peter R. Beasley, Richard B. Benbury, Theodore Bethea, Frank S. Bibb, Benjamin F. Bishop, John W. Blakey, Lawson Botts, Nathaniel C. Bowe, Randolph Bradley, William H. Bray, James Breckenridge, Peachy G. Breckenridge, Virginius K. Brent, Alex A. Burgess, Henry K. Burgwin, John W. Burke, Thomas M. Burke, William D. Buster, William H. Cabell, Alex D. Calcote, Joseph H. Carpenter, Abram C. Carrington,
James P. Carter, Joseph H. Chenoweth, Joseph B. Cherry, Thomas D. Claiborne, Alfred W. Clopton, Alex S. Connor, Charles S. Cowherd, Rayleigh T. Colston, Robert A. Crawford, Lowell Crittenden, Charles G. Crockett, Charles A. Crump, Stapleton Crutchfield, Eugene G. Curry, Basil G. Dabney, Edward M. Dabney, William A. Daniel, Albert Davidson, James L. Davis, Thomas B. Davis, Charles A. Derby, Daniel B. Dew, Madison P. Dearly, Leslie C. Dove, Thomas C. Dudley, William H. Easley, George L. Esman, Edward C. Edmonds, Howell C. Edmondson, John T. Ellis, Peter F. Eaps, James S. Evans, Edward L. Fant, John Fletcher, James S. Forbes,
William A. Forbes, Charles E. Ford, Eusebius M. Folks, Philip F. Fraser, Louis C. Gaines, William Galt, Samuel Garland, Thomas S. Garnett, Charles W. Gay, Simeon B. Gibbons, John T. Gibbs, John T. Gisner, Edmund Good, Patrick H. Grandy, Richard O. Grayson, William J. Green, Francis G. Grigg, Wesley P. Grigg, Anselm H. Hayden, Joel W. Hayden, Charles T. Hay, John A. Hairston, Thomas H. Halcomb, James Hall, John Hall, Joseph A. Hambrick, James B. Hamilton, William R. Hammett, George N. Hammond, Joel M. Hanna, Julian B. Hardy, Thomas L. Harmon, Carter H. Harrison, T. G. Hart, Curtis A. Hartsfield,
Luther C. Haynes, R. H. Helm, John Heth, John W. Hill, Samuel C. Hopkins, Henry W. Hunter, Alexander J. Irvine, Alfred E. Jackson, James H. Jameson, Thomas G. Jarrell, Thomas G. Jefferson, Peyton Johnston, Edward P. Jones, Francis B. Jones, Henry J. Jones, William D. Jones, Harry E. Jordan, Robert H. Keeling, William Kiter, James R. Kent, James M. Kinchlow, Thomas C. Kinney, Edmund Kirby, Hugh R. Kuntz, Francis Lackland, Jacob K. Langhorne, Joseph W. Latimer, Charles E. Locke, Walter A. Lawrence, John Lawson, Nathaniel W. Lee, William F. Lee, James C. Leftwich, Andrew D. Lewis, Richard Logan, Alexander Lyle, David C. Lynch, Edgar Macon, Miles C. Macon, John Y. Madison, John B. Magruder, Francis Mallory, David A. Marubel, John Q. Marr, James K. Marshall, Walter T. Matthews, Benjamin H. May, Robert G. McCants, Craig W. McDonald, William H. McDowell,
Nathaniel M. McGahee, Robert M. McKinney, Levin W. Mears, James L. Meem, Randolph R. Miller, George R. Milton, John S. Moffett, Walter F. Moffett, Andrew J. Montag, John B. Mumau, Charles W. Moore, Edward F. Morgan, William H. Morgan, Tignall J. Morton, John F. Neff, John C. Niemeyer, Charles R. Norris, John M. Oliver, Yelverton N. Oliver, George G. Ote, John M. Pannell, William K. Park, William S. Perrin, Reuben B. Pattison, George S. Patton, Waller T. Patton, Robert S. Pierce, John R. Pearson, Hartwell H. Peebles, John C. Pegram, John R. Pemberton, Edward Pendleton, William W. Pendleton, Thomas J. Pennybacker, Oliver C. Petway, John H. Pitts, Richard H. Powell, William C. Preston, George S. Price, William H. Randolph, John T. Redwood, William W. Reveille, Edward A. Rhodes, Thomas C. Rice, John Q. Richardson, Charles H. Riddick, John D. Ridley, Robert E. Rhodes, Arthur L. Rogers, Robert H. Rutherford,
James R. Scales, George A. Seaborn, James Seabrook, William B. Selden, Keeling Sylvester, Robert H. Simpson, Edward M. Slaughter, Francis W. Smith, John W. Spears, Henry G. Speed, Jacqueline B. Stannard, Edward B. Stark, Benjamin F. Stewart, Nolan Stone, John B. Strange, William E. Stewart, Francis M. Sudduth, Richard D. Sidnor, William H. Tabb, Robert C. Taylor, Thomas S. Taylor, James B. Terrell,
Sorry, he's got
Charles
something for the live
W.
stream.
Terry,
There you go.
Lewis M. Thompson,
We're not doing it on purpose, I
James
promise.
W. Thomas, James
there you go.
B. Terrell,
Yeah, you should be fine.
Francis I. Tomes, Thomas B. Treadway, Erasmus S. Trout, John A. Turner, Samuel Tyler, Charles F. Quohart, George C. Van Epps, Robert F. Von Hall, John T. Waller, James A. Walhall, John C. Ward, William N. Word, Barksdale Walrick, William E. Watkins, William E. Watson, Mandy T. Wheatley, Joseph C. Wheelwright, James W. Wilcox, Benjamin W. Williams, Louis B. Williams, Joseph L. Williamson, Nathaniel C. Wilson, Patrick H. Worsham, Charles T. Wright.
The Spanish-American War. Joseph K. Alston, Henry M. Don, William C. Yeager, Charles D. Jacob, Woodward H. Mabry, William H. Williams, World War I. Gail H. Alexander. Thomas D. Amory. Joseph F. Baldwin. Archibald W. Benners. Charles M. Blackford. Mullen W. Caffey. Irwin A. Carroll. Middleton Chambers. Robert Y. Conrad. James L. Corey. Joseph R. Cushman. Frank Cutchins. Powhatan R. Dance. George F. Deschiel. Alexander W. Dillard. James H. Drake. James H. Ewell Jr. Alexander H. Frazier. Jesse H. Fugate Jr.
Howard F. Gill. Walter S. Goddard. Tracy S. Haskell. Edward T. Hathaway. Peter P. Holmes. Richard J. Howard. William H. Humphreys. Bartlett James. Edward H. Johnson. Gustav Caro. Russell A. Kelly. Ben V. M. LaRue. Atwill T. Lincoln. Hope W. Massey. Eugene N. Mayer. John W. McClellan. Alexander McClintock. Robert E. L. Mitchie. Carter Millam. Charles A. Minton. Richard W. Murphy. James A. Pigou. Rodney W. Polak. Edmund L. Rapkin. James N.C. Richards. Kiffin Y. Rockwell. Edward M. Smith. Vernon L. Sommers. Hugh Stockdale. Melville E. Sullivan. Benjamin T. Tinsley. John B. Tomlinson. James A. Van Sant. William H. Wagner, Jr. Edward L. Wells. William Wheatley. Crispin Wright.
World War II. Reed S. Aaron. Hawes N. Adams. James R. Adams. George D. Akers. James G. Allen, Jr. James P. Allen, Jr. Marvin J. Anderson, Jr. Charles C. Arms. Charles H. Augustine. John R. Banks. Joseph X. Bell. Belton A. Bennett. Beverly S. Blackburn. Neville D. Blakemore. Lawrence C. Blanchard, Jr. Robert W. Bogus, Jr. Richard Booth, Jr. Paul L. Borden, Jr. J. K. Bowman, Jr. Simon B. Buckner. George T. Bordeaux, Jr. John R. Bush. Charles A. Butler, Jr. Cornelius Z. Byrd. William C. Campbell, Jr. John R. T. Carmichael. Whitman S. Carpenter. Bernard P. Carter, Jr. Louis G. Chadwick. Philip G. Chapman. John H. Christian, Jr. Douglas M. Clark. Cecil P. Coburn. Franklin W. Kaufman. William W. Coleman. Freeling T. Colt. Joseph B. Coopwood.
Williams J. Dance, Jr. Alfred C. Darden, Jr. Hester C. Corthan. William H. Darden. Edgar M. Dickerson. Richard P. Dillon. Gerald R. Dobkins. Kenna G. Easton. William W. Emori. Arnold H. Ewell. Andre P. Falwell, Charles J. Falconker III, Joseph H. Fleming III, Charles B. Fadale, Walter A. Ford, Benjamin A. Fry, Thomas P. Fullov, Garrett Robert Jr., James C. Gilliland, Sidney R. Gittins Jr., Alfred P. Godden Jr., Charles H. Gompf, Fleming C. Goolsby, Robert L. Guy, Frank G. Hamilton, George B. Handy, Joseph D. Harris, Seal Harris Jr., Charles F. Harrison, Charles F. Haupt, Jesse H. Heath Jr., Louis A. Hendel Jr., Fred B. Hill, Frederick A. Hippie, Shirley T. Holland Jr., Winard Hoover, Gilder S. Horn Jr., Henry C. Hudgens, William H. Humlog Jr., Victor H. Idle Jr., John K. Jones Jr., James N. Jones, Meriwether Jones, Robert E. Jones, Robert F. Jones, Thaddeus W. Jones Jr., Benjamin R. Crefot, Charles L. Kierans Jr., William P. Keevan Jr., Philip H. Kiley, Everett G. King, Rufus D. King Jr., Stuart W. King, William J. Lang Jr., Valentine B. Lawless, Robert T. Lemon Jr., Robert A. Lewis, Louis A. Lillard, Jackson S. Littrell, Malcolm B. McKinnon, James S. McLean, Jr.,
Bariah McGuffin III, William Mall, Jr., William Markin D., Arthur W. Markless, Richard J. Marshall, Jr., Walter C. Martin, Jr., Walter N. Mason, Jr., George A. Masonberg, Jr., James T. Matthews, Nelson McCaw, William S. McCauley, John K. McCullough, John J. McEvedy, Douglas G. McMillan, George F. Miller, Noel M. Moore, Jr., Dan J. Morton, Marcus A. Mullen, Charles F. Nash, Alexander C. Newton, Robert W. Nix III, David R. Oakey, Leo E. Offenstein, Thomas R. Opie, Addison W. Palmer, Jr., George S. Patton III, Alexander B. Pendleton, George B. Peters, Samuel D. Polar, George W. Brenneman, John M. Ribble, William T. S. Roberts, Lane Rogers, Jr., Edward D. Rom, William V. Sanford, Leonard Savitz, Bailey M. Sawyer, Evano H. Sclater, Jr., James F. Searcy, John A. Shanklin, Jr., Harold C. Sheffy, William G. Schultz, Robert L. Sibley, Jr., Manly O. Simpson, Jr.,
Franklin F. Smith, Harry L. Smith, Jr., James A. Smith III, William A. Smith. Walter S. Smith, Jr. Joseph A. Sosby, Jr. Augustus Spencer. George H. Steed, Jr. Virginius R. Stell, Jr. Joseph W. Sterney. John V. Summerlin. Joseph A. Summers, Jr. Joseph R. Sweating, Jr. Samuel A. Syme. James P. Taylor. Peyton Jr. Thompson. Edward W. Thompson. Paul J. Thompson, Jr. Thomas L. Thrasher, Jr. William F. Topham. Harold W. Treacle. Norman R. Turpin. Richard W. Twombly. Maurice L. Tyler, Jr. William P. Upshur. Carter S. Vaden. Eugene R. Venable. Sidney A. Vincent, Jr. Linwood Vincent, Jr. Robert D. Wall. David G. Waller. Harvey M. Walthall. Joseph G. Ward. John J. Ward, Jr. John B. Warren, Jr. George M. White. Walter P. White. George C. Wilcox. William R. Williams. John D. Wilson. Horatio C. Woodhouse. John A. Woodall. Edgar M. Young, Jr.
The Korean War. John O. Bates, Jr. James D. Carey. John A. Dill, Jr. William E. Dressler. Pattison Gilliam. Douglas H. Hatfield. William H. Hickman. Clarence A. Martin, Jr. Irvin E. Knockman. Frank M. Parker, Jr., Robert D. Ramsey, Jr., Robert N. Smith, F. A. Stevenson, Jr., Eugene W. Stewart, Kenneth E. Taft, Jr., John A. Tate, Robert S. Toss, Howell G. Thomas, Jr., Thomas W. Tiggart, John W. Timmons, Jr., R. T. Townsend, Earl L. Valentine, Jr., Alan M. Volk, Walton H. Walker, Charles P. Walther, Stanley Wright, Jr.,
The Vietnam War. Paul M. Bayless. William B. Bell. Thomas G. Blair, Jr. Herbert W. Booth, Jr. Herbert H. Butt, Jr. Richard L. Butt. Alan L. Didriskin. John A. B. Dillard, Jr. Jefferson S. Dotson. Walter F. Drager, Jr. Jesse F. Frost. Arthur L. Galloway, Jr. Douglas B. Green III. Harry B. Hamilton III. Clifford S. Heathcote, Jr. William D. Hoyler, Jr. James Johnson. John W. Kennedy. Peter S. Kleinberg. John H. Latin, Jr. Richard D. LeMay, Jr. Joseph M. Lingle, Jr. Joseph B. Mack, Jr. William R. Martin. James J. Masadi. Donald J. Mataro, Jr. Walter R. McCarthy, Jr. Joseph G. Mixon. Daniel L. Mullins. Dennis Nicholas.
Thomas T. Oliver. Edwin N. Osborne, Jr. Scott K. Party, James P. Rogan, Marion G. Runin, Lawrence W. Scanlon, Edmund B. Scarborough, Vincent C. Scott, Joseph P. Samo, David G. Spearman, Ronnie H. Stone, Douglas J. Franklin W. Webb, Mark C. Whittier, the Persian Gulf War, Terry L. Plunk, Thomas C. M. Zuner,
The Global War on Terrorism. Ryan E. Doltz, James C. Edge, Dale R. Griffin, Joshua C. Hurley, Charles W. Mathers, William L. McMillan III, Lowell T. Miller, Charles A. Ransom, Paul R. Syverson III, John R. Teal, David L. Williams, Gregory R. Wright Jr., Luke C. Woolenwaber,
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the by name reading of the Virginia Military Institute's alumni who have died on the field of honor. The memorial parade will step off in approximately 3 minutes.
Yes. After I see members of veterans of law enforcement not in uniform, and also under the sign of courtesy, that's when I need the microphone.
But you're going to read all the way through?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
So, do you want a script?
Oh, do you care if you got it?
Yes, sir.
That'd be great. Good.
Okay. You can take this one, sir.
Are we good to
Yes.
go that way?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Virginia Military Institute and to the memorial ceremony and parade. The Institute would like to welcome and recognize in attendance today the members of the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company of Massachusetts, including Lieutenant Colonel Enoch Woody Woodhouse, Jr., age 94, one of the last living Tuskegee Airmen. AHAC is the oldest chartered military organization in the Western Hemisphere. Due to this event's memorial nature, once the ceremony starts, spectators should remain in place until the end of the parade and until the corps is returned to barracks. The area in front of the statue of Virginia mourning her dead, as well as along the parade ground, is restricted from all spectator movement from now until the conclusion of the parade. No one will be allowed to walk in this area or cross the street during the ceremony and parade. Since 1839, the Virginia Military Institute has produced leaders of character who have served their country in peace and at war. From the Mexican War to the War on Terrorism, VMI cadets and alumni have answered the call to service. 591 VMI alumni have died on the field of honor in service to our nation. Today, the Corps of Cadets pays tribute to all of those alumni who have valiantly given the ultimate sacrifice in their commitment to VMI's hallmark values of leadership, courage, honor, and devotion to duty. Since the Institute's inception, VMI alumni have exhibited courage and honor, serving and sacrificing in each of the nation's wars. Beginning 1 hour ago, a by-name reading of all 591 VMI alumni killed in action in each of our nation's war was read. Once the corps is formed on the parade ground, a roll call and report will be given in memory of these alumni. After the roll call, wreaths will be placed at the monument Virginia mourning her dead and at each of the 3 barracks arches nearing the plaques depicting the names of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. A prayer will be offered by the VMI chaplain, Colonel Robert Phillips. The firing party will fire a 3-volley salute, and taps will sound, followed by the playing of Amazing Grace. The Corps of Cadets will then pass a review. In this manner, the Corps pays its respects to all the Institute's alumni who have served and continue to serve their nation, and to all those who have died on the field of honor. On behalf of the Institute and the Corps of Cadets, thank you for joining us today on this very important occasion. At this time, the alumni roll call and wreath-laying ceremony will begin. It is a military tradition to honor those who have given their lives in service to their country with a roll call.
Honor
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, a wreath is being laid on the statue of Virginia mourning her dead, and at each of the 3 barracks arches. In just a moment, the Corps Chaplain, Colonel Phillips, will offer a prayer in remembrance. A firing detail will fire a 3-volley salute, and taps will be played in their honor. Please stand for the prayer, firing party, and taps.
Let us pray. Lord, today we remember the 591 alumni who answered our nation's call and whose commitment to duty cost them their lives. From the Civil War battlefields to the Ardennes forest, the trenches of Germany, the beaches in Normandy, the frozen tundra in Korea, the sweltering jungles of Vietnam, from the deserts of Iraq to the mountain passes of Afghanistan, VMI alumni have answered the call, they have shed their blood, and given the last full measure of devotion. Though their lives were cut short, we know that their spirit continues to linger with us. It is felt on the 4 stoops of the barracks, in the ranks of our formations, in the beating of the drums, in the daily rising and lowering of the flags, in the sounding of reveille and the playing of taps. May that spirit of duty, honor, and sacrifice continue to dwell in the hearts of every VMI man and woman. May it permeate our character. May it always remain the bedrock of our identity. And may it serve to strengthen our nation. Lord, help us to comprehend the depth and the sacredness of this moment. Help us to grasp the meaning and the importance of this ceremony. Help us to balance our lofty thoughts of freedom and democracy and heroism with the very sober reality of loss and sorrow and sacrifice. Lord, may the symbols, the rituals, and the traditions of this day influence each of us at the very core of our soul. May it cause us to stand firmly on our values, to prioritize those things that are of the greatest importance, and to teach us to treasure the gift of life. But above all, may it instill within each of us the willingness and the readiness to embrace that same devotion to duty that we memorialize here today. We ask this in your holy name. Amen.
It is proper at this time to place your right hand over your heart. Uniformed personnel should render the military salute. Members and veterans of the armed forces not in uniform may also render the same courtesy.
Iron team, iron 3 volleys. Half right, think. 4, ready, aim, 5. Ready, aim, 5. Ready, aim, 5. Half left, pace.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Taking the review today is the Commandant, Colonel Wanovich. Joining Colonel Wanovich is Major General Cedric Wins, the Institute's 15th Superintendent.
Action review.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the colors pass your location, it is proper to stand and render proper honors. Once the colors have passed, you may be seated.
Ready? All right. Ready? Hard. Hard. Ready? Hard. Hard. Ready? Hard. Ready? Ready? Hard. Hey! Ready? Hard. Hard. Ready? Hard. Hard. Ready? Yards. Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's ceremony. On behalf of the Corps of Cadets, we would like to thank you for your attendance, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your visit to the Virginia Military Institute.